answers from me, I'm afraid. But thanks for the opportunity to be here. Thanks to Engineers Without Borders and to Engineers Australia for hosting. And thanks to Bron for a compelling lead-in and story there as well. So I see a lot of parallels with your experience here with I guess, a little bit of what I'd like to talk about, which I've entitled Mud, Sweat and Tears, and you'll see why as we work through. So what I'd like to just talk a little bit about this morning is a little bit of my journey, and that's most particularly been internationally, places like El Salvador, India, and then a little bit of discussion about Indigenous housing here in Australia, which I'm not an expert on that. I don't know much about it, but I find it challenging and disturbing. So I'd like to explore that a little bit and then pose some discussions about what an alternative approach might look like. And for that, I'm going to need your engagement and thoughts in the discussion. I guess in this space, really kicked off in 2001. There was a massive earthquake in El Salvador. There were hundreds of thousands of houses destroyed and associated livelihoods. People left with this as everything they owned. So I spent 4 or 5 months there working with an NGO involved in some of the immediate post-earthquake response and recovery efforts. And curiously, during that time, there was a lot of talk about the state of housing. Isn't it a tragedy that over 110,000 mud brick houses were destroyed? Perhaps we should ban mud brick houses because they kill people and this is what happens. So let's build concrete block houses, brick houses, and with a real lack of acknowledgement of the history and the traditional form of construction and all the benefits that has in an environment like El Salvador. Things like availability of materials, low cost, ability for people to build their own homes, to expand their own homes, repair their homes. Probably the most striking in that it's quite an unremarkable image, but I returned to El Salvador in 2005, having spent time there in 2001 and 2002, and I thought, well, this would be interesting to see how this whole reconstruction is going. There's been millions and millions of dollars of international aid injected to help solve this issue, and yet this was not an uncommon sight. This is a family who still were waiting for the house to be built from an NGO post-earthquake, and that's how they were It's a very, very common process. And so these were some of my observations, and this is my observations from an international context. And this was what I saw. It was that the current methods of, in this particular case, reconstruction post-earthquake or housing solutions were too costly, too complicated, and unsustainable. I also observed, probably not surprisingly, that the situation is real, it's big, it's complicated. Clearly there are limited resources available. There are various solutions, but posing a lot of questions about which solutions are the most appropriate and sustainable. And this issue of the risk of aid dependency. Solutions need to be sustainable, appropriate, practical, simple, low cost, affordable, using local materials, and not prescriptive solutions. So it's not saying we've designed this in some engineering house like Worley Parsons or wherever else, and this is the house that everyone's going to get. And that these solutions are complex and they need to consider a broad spectrum of components. social, political, cultural, historical, technical, economic, environmental. And Brian talked about some of these issues in her presentation. Who defines the problem? Who generates the solutions? How do we understand the problem? And of course, lecturing to students, I talk about multidisciplinary problems and trying to get engineers to think outside of engineering, it's just maths and equations, with all respect to maths and equations, that it's multidisciplinary. So, over the course of the PhD research that I did, apart from the field research and investigation, we also did quite an extensive program of shape table testing, building different mud brick structures. We built 11 U-shaped wall panels, and then culminating in this structure, which is a model house. And this was after a series of very strong earthquakes and shaking. So what we can see is a very damaged house. Happy to talk about the structural engineering and dynamics of this if you're interested. But bottom line is, with a bit of bamboo, a bit of string, a bit of string and a bit of fencing wire, we've got a house that will withstand an earthquake, and at least enough to allow people to escape, allow people to re-enter after the event to collect their possessions, and in the event of a non-severe earthquake, being able to repair. So, following from that, I had some time in India. I've just got some slides here from my India experience, where we partnered up with a local organisation to refurbish these school buildings. This is up in the state of Himachal Pradesh, in the north-west of India. The Himalayas are there on the doorstep. We had some community forums that talked about the risk of earthquakes. Oh no, we don't have earthquakes here. I said, well, there's the beautiful Himalayas. I wonder why they're forming, because plates are colliding, and we don't have earthquakes here, but in the village down the road, 15 minutes down the way, they had a big earthquake 100 years ago. They have earthquakes there. So, a whole bunch of, interesting cultural aspects, and the process that even we went to select where to work involved a 2-month field trip for me, visiting a bunch of areas, looking at statistics, understanding, where are the needs, working and identifying a local partner NGO who had the language, the culture and everything else, so I could come in and say, got some ideas, let's work with this. So this is the school, this is the pre-refurbishment state. Pretty appalling. No iPhones here. And this is the process. There's a bit of a medley of photos from El Salvador just to show the process, but it's common. So training local builders, local craftspeople, measuring up the building, drilling some holes in, tying on or affixing the bamboo, and putting some fencing wire around, twist that around with a nail and driving into the wall. So it's not particularly complex. So back at the school here, a bit more complicated, working with a pretty dilapidated building. Partway through, we realised the roof was in an appalling state, so we decided to take the tiles off and rebuild the roof structure the same week that the wet season arrived. So that was an interesting timing aspect. One of the most enjoyable aspects of this particular project was in the pre-work that I'd done some months before. I visited some of the universities, and there are a couple of very keen, very bright young students who volunteered to come and work on this project. And this is on auto progress. So Vishal here in the red and also over here was a translator, was an interface, and to me that was quite an exceptional model. I mean, he was just a guy who was facing pressure from his family to go and get a real job, and here he was mucking around with mud bricks and bamboo. But the testimony of him at the back end of the process of saying, this has been the most incredible experience for him, and he knows what his classmates were doing, either just having the summer off or slotting into sort of fairly mainstream engineering work. very large community component. That was the deal. We're working with the school, and there was rosters developed for volunteers to come and help doing whatever needed to be done, and the different kids pitched in. And certainly working with the kids was one of the highlights. Even a few renditions of Home Among the Gum Trees and whatnot, just to keep all that ticking. And this was really, I think, probably one of the proudest moments of the project for all of the participants to have their certificates of acknowledgement of participation in this building program. And this is the end result. So this is the same building. Yeah, it's still not fantastic, but it's pretty exceptional. And even the little things of putting skylights on the roof to actually create a little bit more natural lighting.